Flag on the play. Take 2. Welcome back, Mrs. Ryan.
Hello. Hello.
Officially, we are back. Yay. We are back. Hello, Mark. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good.
Welcome,
Life is exciting.
welcome.
Thank you.
We're sitting here with Mark Scott
Zickery.
Because it's very easy to pronounce. For some reason, I had Mark Zickery down, and then I added your middle name because I saw it was on IMDb and then everywhere else. I'm assuming that's maybe a union thing. Is that how that came about?
Well, the funny thing is, because in my teens, I was practicing my writer's name, and I took a poll of people, and they said Mark Scott Zickery sounded like a writer. So, but the interesting thing is, I once asked my mom. Both my parents were married 4 times, and I was from their first marriage, their only child from the first marriage. So I said to my mom, "Why did you name me Mark with a C instead of a K?" And she said, "Well, if you look at Zickery, it's a tall capital letter and all small letters with nothing sticking up or sticking down. So M-A-R-C is the same way." And I said, "Well, what about the Scott in the middle with those 2 T's?" And she said, "Well, that's after an old boyfriend," which she had not told my father. So it's like, okay, perfect. So, yep. So.
I love the idea of the visually stimulating the idea of that matching. I mean, you know, I do things that way with fonts and house industries and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated that you're here. I'm fascinated by your career.
Thanks.
I'm a poet. I don't know it. There's all sorts of more things you're going to figure out about me. I feel like maybe the best way to start is to tell you that I don't know much about science fiction.
That's great.
And I want to know what makes something science fiction. What makes science fiction? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of different definitions. One of my teachers, Damon Knight, who's the guy who came up with To Serve Man, which was made into a great Twilight Zone episode.
It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. It's one of my favorites.
Well, he was a science fiction writer and a critic, and he said his definition of science fiction is what I'm pointing at when I say science fiction. And I thought that was a pretty good one. But realistically, science fiction is just, you're extrapolating from the present to a future, or utilizing technology, or it's sort of whatever works. I mean,
okay.
Science
so
fiction.
It's maybe a broader term than I realized.
I mean, the real difference between fantasy and science fiction is that science fiction gives a technological or a pseudo-technological explanation for what the fantastic element is, whereas fantasy doesn't. It just has magic, and that's that. Harry Potter, So
would Lord of the Rings be fantasy?
Of course.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. But,
and Game of Thrones, fantasy.
Yes, absolutely. But Star Trek,
Star Wars?
Star Wars is on the bubble because
Okay.
it sort of has magic as well as technology.
Oh, because of the Force
and lightsabers and all that. It's
that's
kind
a
of
weird one.
and it's a long time ago in a galaxy far
That
away.
looks
But the
like
guy's
the
still
future.
but the guy's still named Luke. So it's a little dicey. But
you're saying it should be Lucas? Oh boy, that never occurred to me. By the way, is that why he's Luke?
Yeah, it is.
Is it really?
Well,
after George Lucas,
every great
I mean,
piece
I feel like an idiot. I don't know much about Star Wars either.
Well, every great piece of writing has to have a truth at its center for it to work and resonate. And George Lucas grew up in Modesto, and he felt that he wanted a grand life of adventure and excitement and fame, and he felt that the world was just passing him by there in Modesto. And so he extrapolated that to a fantasy setting and made Luke Skywalker his...
So they made basically the Modesto is the planet, the desert planet that Luke lives on.
And that's his alter ego, kind of?
Yes, exactly. And so it became a science fiction version of his
You might
life.
make me a fan of all this stuff after today.
But that's why it resonates. That's why it works, because
It's real.
there's a truth, yes. And science fiction definitely appeals to people who feel like outcasts, people who feel a need for escape, but also you want it to resonate with your life and teach you lessons. Star Trek certainly taught a lot of people to be kinder and to have more connected lives in many, many ways.
Is it all right with you if I jump all over the place?
Of course.
This probably won't be very fluid, but you just said
no.
something that is literally a note on my card.
Sure, of course. I'm glad you have notes.
I'd like to bring up some of your deep past stuff,
Of
if
course.
that's okay, because
Anything.
it also coincides with my childhood.
Nothing's off the table.
You wrote on the Smurfs.
I did.
The original Smurfs,
Yes.
Hanna-Barbera.
That's right.
Yes, I did. I wrote
The
it-
Smurfs is where I
Yes.
learned the difference between, combined with Mr. Rogers and Sesame
Yes.
Street, is where I learned the difference between good and bad.
Yes. Well, I'm the only writer who wrote for both Smurfs and Friday the 13th, the series. And what they had
I
in
love that too, by the way. That's the thing.
And what they had in common.
No Jason in Friday the 13th.
But they actually
series.
had more in common than you think, because in both shows, the most common phrase that anyone said was, "Oh no." So, So
it showed you Smurfs. There was constant fear and teamwork and all of the fundamentals that would make somebody a good person,
and it was great. It was fun. The characters were very distinctive, and it was funny because I never actually. Some animation writers grew up watching cartoons and wanting to write cartoons, and it was the love of their life. They could talk to Chuck Jones and Tex Avery backwards and forwards and all that stuff. And but I wasn't one of those guys. I mean, I liked the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes, but I wanted to be a science fiction writer working on Star Trek and those kind of shows. But when I was a teenager, I met a young writer named Michael Reeves, and he was writing animation, and he brought me in initially as a collaborator, and that was very obvious I could write them on my own. And so the first animated script I wrote was for Space Ghost, and then I wrote for Smurfs and He-Man and Super Friends and Real Ghostbusters and all that.
Space Ghost Coast to Coast, the talk show?
No, this was the earlier version where Space Ghost was actually a superhero in space.
Oh, wow. I always wondered where he came from. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, no, he had a absolutely great costume.
All right, well then maybe jumping just slightly ahead from the Smurfs, another show that was very, very big to me because I love the franchise.
Sure.
You may already know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
The Real Ghostbusters.
Yes, it was a great show. And
that taught me how to use my imagination, and it taught me to expand what's possible.
Yes. Well, the fun part was, I wrote a bunch of those, and the fun part was that the movie wasn't even on home video yet, and we all loved the movie. So they actually sent us a VHS video cassette of the movie so we could watch it, and we all agreed
to get the beats, like to get to the characters.
The character voice, the sensibility.
Okay.
And one of the lovely things was Joe Straczynski, who was a friend of mine. He story edited the show, and he said to us, we were all the writers, he said, I want this to be written just like it's a sequel to the movie. So you don't write down to the audience. It's not a kid show, quote unquote. And so I was writing.
Did you ever see the cartoon, The Real Ghostbusters?
Mm-hmm. It was fun.
It was
loved
fantastic.
Yeah. I had a younger brother who was like 3 years younger than me, and so I watched a lot of the stuff he loved, and that was one of them.
It was fun. And so I was writing social satire, and I wrote one called Station Identification, where all these characters come out of the television. And so I created a character who was a jam up of Rambo and Gumby, and I named him Gumbo. And it was just fun. It was really fun.
I remember, that was my childhood for sure, and I was so into the franchise.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't want to tell you how into, but we ended up building the car and the whole bit.
Sure, yeah. But
of course, things with Dan Aykroyd and the whole bit.
Yeah, but see, at that time, I wasn't much older than the kids I was writing for. I was in my early 20s.
That's what I was going to ask you. How old were you at that point?
Yeah, well, I sold my first short story at 19. I had my first radio play on the air when I was 18 on KPFK.
So you're already writing before you had all these things.
And I was an art major at UCLA, and so I had gallery shows of my stuff when I was a teenager. And then I broke into TV. I started writing the Twilight Zone Companion when I was 22, and I got into TV by the time I was 22 or 23, and had a really great run, writing for all the studios and networks. It was fun.
The original Twilight Zone, you mentioned The Outer Limits before. There's another one it's escaping me right now, but my friend Jeannot used to direct on as well.
Yeah, Night Gallery.
Night Gallery, exactly. Do you know Jeannot Svark?
Of course.
Do you really?
Oh, sure. I mean, who doesn't?
No one ever seems to.
We used to be very close. He's a wonderful man. We used to work together a lot, and now I haven't seen him in a long time, but still correspond.
Sure.
Jaws 2, yeah.
Jaws 2 for you. Supergirl, Somewhere in Time, a lot of wonderful things, and a lot of television since.
Somewhere in Time's a great movie.
Gosh, I don't even remember how that came about, but the
Night Gallery. We were talking Night Gallery.
All of those shows, I caught them on the Nick at Night and on the rerun stuff, but they still were as influential as, say, the Real Ghostbusters.
You bet.
They went somewhere. The Real Ghostbusters was a very, very. I don't want to make the whole show about that, but it was a very, very interesting. I remember one specifically where they go to the other side. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They go through the containment unit into past the wall.
That's
remember
fun.
In the movie, that's a big Twinkie.
Yeah.
You get to go into where all the ghosts are stored. That remember, Dickless shuts the power grid off and it all goes up. Okay, well,
you see who's there?
It's a different. It's not just the other side of the wall. It's a different world.
Wow. That's fun.
It was very, very fascinating.
Cool. Yeah.
It was very, very fascinating. And again, it showed the kids get outside the box.
That's right. Yeah, well, we were really pretty subversive. I mean, all of us who were writing for those animated shows, first of all, when I came into animation writers didn't have agents. So my friend Michael Reeves, who brought me in, he got an agent. He was the first animation writer to have an agent. Then Candy Montero, basically got a lock on all of the animation writers. So we all knew each other. We'd all hang out. We'd go to parties together. We were all in our 20s and early 30s at the latest. And so we were writing. We were very ambitious, and we were writing short stories and novels and writing for TV. And it was and we'd all kind of run stories by each other and all of that. It was a very collegial atmosphere. So it was a lot of fun.
Gosh, that's so neat. And then I remember hearing, anyway, I don't know if this is true, but the animation was actually done overseas or somewhere else. It was
yes. The
writing and talent was here, I think.
Yes, but I mean, when I was in at the very end of ink and paint, where they were actually drawing it on cells and animating those, and Hanna-Barbera, I think, was the last studio that was doing the animation here, and then Filmation started farming it out to Asia. Yeah, but
just part of the transition.
Yeah, but it was still great fun, and again, we were
where were you doing that? What is an anime? Where is
what was
this?
it like?
Yeah, I came up through live action, so I know a production office.
Yes.
I know where the set
Yes.
is, all that stuff. But you guys are in a writing room with a voiceover booth or something.
No, we were freelancers, and so for the most part, I mean, some people were on staff. If you were a story editor, you'd be on staff, but as freelancers, we were writing for multiple shows simultaneously. So a given week, I might be coming up with a premise for Real Ghostbusters and working on an outline for Smurfs and coming up with and writing a script for He-Man
So
or
did
whatever.
you work from home then?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, what a wonderful.
Yeah, and sometimes I'd go to like a coffee house or UCLA's library to work, and then.
But the world is your office.
Yeah, and you could earn extremely good money very, very quickly, and but I wanted to make the leap to live action, and so basically at one point. I earned enough for the entire year. I could earn about $100,000 in 3 months, and I told all of my employers that I was done for that period to write my live action spec screenplay. And they started calling me with offers. I had to turn down $200,000 of work in 2 days, and that ruined your writing day. So that's when I would go to UCLA. This is before cell phones.
It does ruin your writing day. Your creativity shot.
Right. So I went to UCLA, and I would write there, and I took a writing class just to give me deadlines. And that script, I wrote this script called Piece of Cake, and it sold, and it got me a pilot deal with NBC, and then I was off and running in live action. So that was how that went.
All right. Well, then I'm going to skip forward a little bit further. Then we're going to go to live action now.
If you'd like.
Sliders.
Yes.
Sliders again, incredibly influential show on my generation.
Right.
I don't know. I don't want to put it up there with Back to the Future. Maybe Quantum Leap parallels.
Yeah.
But essentially, alternate universes, alternate realities, alternate things, and we're
When
gonna
was that?
more.
I don't know.
Sliders was great. It was with
It's a fun show.
Mr. Jerry O'Connell.
Jerry O'Connell, yeah.
And from Raiders of the Lost Ark, the fantastic another three
John
names.
Rhys Davies. Yeah.
Oh.
I'm trying to think. It was
Basically,
five people, I think.
Yeah,
Five
it ran 3 seasons on Fox, and then Fox canceled it, and Sci-Fi picked it up. And I was hired as a producer on the 4th season. There'd been a lot of chaos in the 3rd season behind the scenes, and they hired me to kind of reinvent the show.
Was there a
and
cast changeover?
Yes, John Rhys Davies left, and but it was really fun because I'd been writing a lot of stuff by then, and I was a science fiction guy, so I wanted it to live up to the great possibility of its premise. So because they'd been ripping off movies and all these things that were not useful, and so I said, well, we're not going to rip off movies anymore. We're going to come up with things that are original.
At one point, they were just
Yeah.
Doing it was like the old days of Knight Rider and Airwolf. It was just anywhere on the Universal backlot we could shoot.
Yes,
There's
yes,
one episode that's
yes.
done in the backdraft ride.
Yes,
except
yes.
it's not the backdraft ride. It's some
Well,
fiery
well,
inferno.
the fun part of that was I was the writer producer for the entire 4th season, and so my name's on every one of those. But that was the season the show moved down from Canada to the Universal backlot, and I love backlots, and because Twilight Zone was shot on the Metro.
You grew up with it the same way I did, right?
I grew up in L.A., so I went to the MGM auction when I was a kid, and so when we were on the Universal lot shooting Sliders, our standing sets were on stage 3, but Time Cop, the TV show Time Cop, was shooting on the next soundstage over, and it was canceled, and they were going to tear down those sets. So I went on to those sets and came up with an episode called Slide Cage for Sliders that could use those sets. So I went back to the office.
Strike it.
I said to my assistant, tell him not to strike it. So we got a $500,000 set for free. And the first question I asked when I was hired, because Rod Serling...
And it's not even a location, right? Because you're staying on the lot.
Right.
Oh, my God.
No, because Twilight Zone, because I researched Twilight Zone. I wrote the Twilight Zone Companion starting when I was 22 to learn how to write and produce TV. That was my goal. And Rod Serling shot Twilight Zone at MGM. He had access to every prop, every set, every costume ever made for any MGM TV show or movie.
Just the archives were available.
They were using stuff from lots of stuff from Forbidden Planet. They were using stuff from the Andy Hardy Street. They were shooting where Meet Me in St. Louis was shot. And
Wow.
So when I was hired on Sliders, the first question I asked was, do we have access to every set, prop, and costume from Universal? And our line producer said, that's an interesting question. No one's ever asked that. So he said, well, I'll find out. So he came
Not
back.
since Glenn A. Larson.
Yeah, but he came back and he said, with very few exceptions, the answer is yes. So we were using stuff from 12 Monkeys and Jurassic Park and so forth.
That's
anything that was going on at the time.
And so it gave us huge, it expanded our possibility, our production budget, so we were able to do a lot more.
Versus just a stage in Vancouver.
Yeah, and so it was hugely fun. fun. And dealing with parallel worlds, I was able to put in a lot of in-jokes. Like at one point, one episode, they're coming out of a movie. They're in a parallel Earth. They're coming out of a movie.
They're sliding between these different
timelines. And so they've just seen The Man Who Would Be King, starring Humphrey Bogart and Clark Gable, which was a film John Huston wanted to make, but then Humphrey Bogart died and he wasn't able to make it. So in this parallel Earth,
reality, it happened.
they just come out talking about that movie. He ultimately made the movie with Sean Connery and Michael Caine decades later, and then they slide to another Earth where the marquee is The Wizard of Oz, starring W.C. Fields and Shirley Temple. And again, that was the cast they initially tried to get, and so it was very fun to have those little tips of the hat.
Nods for you.
Yeah, because I'm such a cineast, So it was fun, great fun.
That sounds like the perfect marriage, you getting to write stuff like that.
Yeah, but also because Fox had kind of run the show into the ground, the first thing we did was we met with our actors one-on-one, and we said, what do you think's working, what do you think's not? And they told us. And then
This is all you? This is your...
and the other producers on the show.
You are.
And then we went to the World Science Fiction Convention. We had a meeting with the Sliders fans. Now online, everyone was saying, kill the show, we hate the show, blah, blah, blah. And
because it had changed. It was not what it used to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I said to the fans, what do you like about the show and what do you hate about the show? And they told us what they hated about the show. And I said, we agree. And we're going to fix it. Yeah. And so give us a chance. And so the premiere of the 4th season got the highest rating in the history of the Sci-Fi Channel, of anything they'd ever aired. And so the fans came back. And because week after week it was exciting, it was varied. The actors were engaged because we were writing shows that showed the potential of the show.
Right.
And it was hugely fun. And so I really loved doing that. It was great. Well, I love being on a studio a lot. I loved being at Paramount, all that stuff.
Yeah, well, all right. You are king of the segue. It's incredible. It's like you saw what I was writing. You brought up the MGM auction.
Yes.
I'd like to go back to the Paramount auction because you have history with Star Trek.
Sure, yes.
I used to work on the TV show Everybody Hates Chris.
Really?
We were the very first show to occupy the property and wardrobe building after they gutted it and made it offices.
Yeah.
We're the very first people in.
Yeah.
Do you remember all of that? Do you remember
Sure.
the truckloads of Star Trek props and wardrobe and everything? I mean, containers full.
Yeah.
That they were just... I think they hauled that shit to the dump. I don't even know where a lot of it went. I think most of it literally got thrown out.
They sold a lot of the Star Trek costumes to It's a Wrap, which is a company that sells wardrobe from new movies and TV shows.
Right.
It finds its way one way or another in various places, but
the wardrobe maybe, but
a
I mean,
lot
some
of
of
the
those old
history
props
gets-
that look like garbage because they're so
a lot-
beat up to
yeah.
someone like you or me might have been like, oh, that's from...
Well, yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of Blade Runner, and a friend of mine built the city in Blade Runner, so I said to him, if you could give me anything from Blade Runner, even a little piece of nothing, it would be like the true cross to me. So he gave me part of the city, so I've got that at home.
A miniature.
It's this brass cutout of a futuristic skyline, and they made a whole bunch of those and stacked them, and then illuminated them and did all sorts of things, and so I have that
Movie
now.
magic.
Where do you keep it?
It's in our place. It's I'm gonna eventually frame it, but now it's just sort of sitting on a counter.
So
and,
cool to have.
Yeah, but again, it's sort of like. They throw stuff out and they don't care. And when I wrote the Twilight Zone Companion, I was amazed the CBS hadn't even held on to their publicity stills, and it was shocking.
It's funny. I've got tape over saying what it is, but there's a digital slate behind you on the wall that is actually from Enterprise.
Wow.
Because it was just being
That's
thrown
great.
out. And I said, I've always wanted like a digital slate just to whatever.
Yeah.
It's
I love that.
Just odd.
But I always loved this stuff. It was always magical to me. And I remember when I was a kid, the original Star Trek came on. I was 10, and
the original Star Trek.
And this is back before VCRs, before any of that stuff. So a show aired, you had to watch it when it aired, and then it was gone. And so I as a little kid, I recorded Star Trek on reel-to-reel audio tape in case it never aired again. And
no way.
And I was being raised by a divorced mom, a single mom, and one of her boyfriends was in showbiz. One of her boyfriends had been one of the Bowery Boys in the movies, and he was later a comedian. He had his own TV show in the 50s. He was a protege of Milton Berle, and he knew I was a Star Trek fan.
Are you going to say the name at some point?
His name was Eddie Leroy.
Okay.
And so and one day he said, "Get in the car. I've got a surprise for you." And he drove me to this apartment, and we knocked on the door. And Nichelle Nichols opened the door, and and that was when Star Trek was on the air. So she was playing Uhura at the time.
This is the only woman, I guess. Yeah.
And so she ushered me in, and she gave me a signed photograph of herself as Uhura and one of her own scripts from Star Trek.
And this is during the time, so she's young, she's beautiful,
and
everything.
Right. And this is not a Xerox. This is Mimeo. It has the blue production pages. It has all the Uhura lines are circled because that's how she would learn her lines. And I was a smart little kid at 10, and I said, "Do you have any more of these?" And she reached into her wastebasket and pulled out 5 more scripts from 5 other episodes and gave them to me. So I have these in my collection still. And the great part is that
and you're in her apartment.
Yeah,
I mean, this is
it was
incredible.
magic. And so on Friday we're shooting a scene with her for Space Command, which is this project I'm shooting now, and to have it all come
real
full
time,
circle.
this
Yes,
week.
this is this week. In a few days, we're shooting a scene with her for this big science fiction series I've been shooting, and so to come full circle all these years later is just a dream come true. And
have you seen her between then and?
Well, it was funny because at
does she know this story? I guess is
yes,
one. Okay.
she does. And at Comic-Con, we've had a Space Command booth at Comic-Con for several years, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was a writer on Star Trek: The Next Generation. He said, "I have a big favor to ask." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Nichelle Nichols needs a place to sign photos of herself at Comic-Con, and I want to see if we could use your booth." And I said, "Of course."
Yes.
And so she was there, and one of our stars, Doug Jones, who's now in Star Trek Discovery, was there. He was the creature in Shape of Water, and so they were there with me, and it was a dream come true. And that's when I started the idea of I want to write a scene for her and shoot a scene with her. And it took all these months, but now it's come to fruition. And it was amazing because there was a letter she wrote me after that visit. I wrote her a thank you note, and she wrote me this wonderful letter back, which I hadn't even read since I was 10. And recently on Mr. Sci-Fi on my YouTube channel, I read that aloud to raise the money to be able to shoot the scene with her. And by the next day, I had the money I needed to shoot the scene. And in the letter, she's talking about Gene Roddenberry and Theodore Sturgeon, who was a writer who later became my mentor when I was a teenager. He was a writer for Star Trek. And a little later, I got to go on the Star Trek set. I was there for the last episode of Star Trek they ever shot, Turnabout Intruder, and that was...
the original series.
The last episode ever. I got to sit in the captain's chair and stand on the transporter and see the little screw-in light bulb they had above in the transporter.
Unbelievable.
And the fascinating thing was that they were shooting a scene in sickbay with Nurse Chapel, who was Majel Barrett, who later married Gene Roddenberry, and one of the stagehands said, "Last show of the season," and Majel Barrett, under her just sotto voce,
season.
said "last show ever."
Yeah.
And the irony was that years later I did a Star Trek episode with George Takei, and she was the computer voice in that episode. So 40 years later I got to record her for that. And so it was just
Are all
amazing.
of these moments, I mean, just
Yeah.
the payoffs for life, right?
Yes,
They
sure.
really are.
Oh,
The
yeah.
results of doing the work.
Well, being able to work with the actors you love, being able to be mentored by the writers who've shaped you. I mean, if not for Twilight Zone and Star Trek and Outer Limits, the original versions of those shows, I wouldn't be a writer. I wouldn't be sitting here. And they gave me that and a number of the writers, Harlan Ellison particularly, who wrote City on the Edge of Forever for Star Trek, he said, "You must not waste your audience's time. You must tell them a story that's from your heart, that's truthful, that's never been seen before. So you can't just be giving them what's easy or what's convenient or an easy sale." And so I always push myself to bring my A game to everything, whether it's Smurfs or Space Command, which I'm doing now, or any of the things I do. It's always my A game. My friend Frank Spotnitz, who created Man in the High Castle, he said you always have to aim for the fences because maybe then you'll get a single, but you always aim for the fences. And I agree. And he also said good enough is never good enough, and I agree with that too.
I love the logic to it. Why
Yeah.
would you swing for a single when you might not
Well,
even
well,
get?
yeah, because your audience is millions of people. Why waste their time? Why waste your time? I mean,
That's where I get.
Yeah, I mean, you.
Are you happy with what you're doing?
Well, yes.
Putting out there.
Well,
You
at the
like
end-
the product?
Well, yes. I mean, the lovely thing about the new world that we live in, I love the new media and everything. I love the internet. I love crowdfunding. I love all this stuff. I wouldn't go back to when I started, when there were only 3 networks and PBS. I wouldn't go back there for anything, because now authenticity is what people prize. And the first writer I ever saw in person was Ray Bradbury when I was 7. Okay, and he spoke at a library.
To me, it's a building on the Paramount lot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you knew
Yeah.
him. That's
well,
amazing.
Ray Bradbury, he was. I saw Ray Bradbury when I was 10. He spoke at a library, and I didn't just sit in the front row. I sat in front of the front row on the carpet, looking up at this hero of mine, because I was reading science fiction as a kid. And he said something then that left a huge mark on me. And he said, "Ideally, your life and your work and your art should all come from the same place." It's like, wow. And it's all about authenticity. Your work be authentic, your life be authentic, your art be authentic.
That's the alignment I was talking
Yes,
about earlier.
it's congruity.
You
It's
have
congruity.
to have all the 3 things aligned.
But see, now with crowdfunding and the internet and all of that, people can tell immediately who's full of shit and who's not.
Right.
The
The worst part is the people
Well, yeah.
who are spewing the shit have no idea. Everyone can see through
No
them.
idea.
Right. But the thing is that if you're authentic, then people will recognize that they're the same as you, and they'll want to be part of your world and let you into their world.
Yeah.
And it's hugely meaningful to me. And my audience has given me over $1 million to shoot Space Command, and we're now in post on the 2-hour pilot.
This is a great time to talk about
Sure.
it. Tell us all
Well,
about
yeah.
Space Command, because
Yeah.
that was something you came up
Sure.
with.
Yes, it was. As I said, I've written for all the major studios and networks, and hundreds of hours of TV, and very successful career. But what and I've been very lucky. Most of the executives I dealt with were smart. They weren't trying to wreck the show. It wasn't. I didn't have to do end runs around these crazy notes, which so many of my friends do.
Is that luck, though? Is
Well,
that luck?
yes and
Were
no.
just at the right studios with the right execs? I find that may be.
Well, I think if you're doing good work, it helps. If you honor them. One of the rules that my wife and I have in every script we write is that no matter what the notes are, every draft has to be better than the previous one, no matter what. So you have to find the way of getting the note to work. And so that's very useful. But
I just think to myself, you dealing with the executive, I'm just sitting across from you, having just met you today, and I can't imagine anyone not getting along with you. If that makes sense, I'm sure that when you're working, there's a different headspace. But you seem to be a very gentle, very warm, very honest and authentic person.
It's the love of a good woman.
In all of the, I know what that's like. And then, in fact, that's a great segue to get us to that. But I feel like maybe perhaps you deserve a little bit more credit than you're giving yourself in this story.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Now back to your story.
But so 26 years ago, a lot of my friends in Hollywood are feeling very beaten down, very depressed, very just bummed out because Hollywood can be so corrosive. And I thought, well, I'm not just going to complain about it. I'm going to do something about it. So I created this round table of writers and directors and actors and producers and editors and composers and novelists, anyone in the game. Anyone in the game. And I said, okay, we're going to meet every Thursday at a restaurant, and anyone with a good heart is welcome. And
this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
He doesn't know anything about us. He knows nothing about us.
Right. And so I started with 6 people. And I said it's going to be every Thursday, and we'll have an email component and a website. But people have to come into one meeting in person to get the vibe, get it, the fact that it's supportive, that it's positive, and so forth.
Yes.
So it started with 6 people, and now it's thousands. And we have offshoots in New York and Dallas and Phoenix and Florida and Atlanta and
What's it called?
New Mexico. It's called The Table. And
The Table.
I run it. And it's thrived, and so I run it every Thursday at a restaurant, and so I started. Is it always
the same? Does it change?
No, it's the same restaurant. It's in the valley, and there's no membership dues, no requirements. People just have to order food because it's a restaurant.
Right.
And
participate.
Right, and once they come to one meeting, they get on the email and reach out to all several thousand members. They can access the website, and they can either come every week or come never, and it works. And so as a result, and the youngest member was 8. Her grandma brought her. She was an actress, and the oldest member's in his 80s.
Wow.
Okay? And everyone's treated with equal respect and equal kindness. And there's no judgment of who's deserving, who has talent. And someone who's an Oscar winner is treated with the same amount of respect as someone who's just gotten off the bus from Keokuk, or wherever, or landed from Tanzania, So
you choose your reference.
So I mentor all these people and thousands of people, and I started hearing about crowdfunding, and that was very interesting to me. And I'd never raised money before, but I was noticing a few years.
Meanwhile, you can access people. You have the ability to do that.
Yes,
interesting.
And so there was so things kind of came together, which was I a few years ago, science fiction was very dark and very dystopic. You had movies like Elysium and After Earth, and you had TV shows like Battlestar Galactica, which I thought was terrific, but very dark. And I wanted to do something that would be inspiring, like Star Trek had inspired me. And I wanted to do something about a space-going show. And because when I was a kid, we expected to land people on Mars. We expected to have that space station. I mean, when I saw 2001 when I was a kid, we thought that was what the future we were going to get.
Yeah, for sure.
Science fiction never predicted we would land on the moon and then stop. And and so
so true.
So I wanted to do a show that was like a hopeful vision of the future, not candy coated, not rose-colored glasses, but just saying we'll have our challenges, but with compassion and bravery we can come together, reach across boundaries and barriers, and create a future worth living in. And so a lot of my friends run network shows, and they said, well, why don't we partner up and we can get a pilot deal? But I knew that the script could be cut off at script, it could be cut off at pilot, the networks would own it, and it would never see the light of day, or they would give us notes that would wreck us.
Or it wouldn't be yours anymore, exactly.
And so I thought, well, I've never raised money, but let's see if I can try. So I thought, okay, let's. Our target was $75,000 to raise over 2 months. We raised that in 3 days, and we kept going, and we raised $221,000, and that was enough for me to open my own studio and roll camera on the 2-hour pilot. And my wife and I, wrote it, directed it, produced it, and it starred Doug Jones from Shape of Water and Star Trek Discovery, and Robert Picardo from Star Trek Voyager and Stargate Atlantis.
Guy.
He's wonderful.
Nice man.
And Mira Furlan and Bill Mumy and Bruce Boxleitner, who I'd worked with on Babylon 5 when I wrote for that show. And And I was friends with Mike Harney from Orange Is the New Black, and I was very funny. I was having lunch with him, and I noticed he looked like our hero that we cast. And I said, "You wanna be in Space Command?" He said, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "Well, I can't pay your quote." He said, "Don't, you know." And so all these people said yes. And then because it was financed by 3,000 people around the world, I remember the Gone with the Wind talent search, the Scarlett O'Hara talent search in 1939, and I thought, everyone in the world is paying for this. Why don't we have a talent search for 2 of the leads? Not a walk-on, not one line, but for 2 of the leads where anyone anywhere in the world can download the sides, shoot their own audition for 2 of the leads. And so we got 7,000 inquiries, 1,200 videos, and we ended up casting 9 actors from those auditions. We had callbacks. And
not even the lead, just in general.
For the leads,
Wow.
for the leads. And
really?
These are the leads, yes. And one of the roles, Lieutenant Bradbury, was could be a male or female, but Captain Kemmer was a male, but one actress was bold enough to audition for that role, and so I had her come in, and she was great. So I created a female captain who had the sister ship of our hero ship, and she's one of our leads now too. And so again, it was very fun to have actors who were very famous and had millions of fans, and bring in these newcomers who were very talented and give them a shot they never would have had. So our lead Ethan McDowell is from Wyoming. Brian McClure, who won the role of Lieutenant Bradbury, is from Iowa. And in fact, the scene with Nichelle Nichols, Ethan McDowell is going to fly in from Atlanta. I'm flying him in from Atlanta to be in the scene with Nichelle. And so because of the internet, because it's so permeable now, and one of my friends who was the showrunner on Walking Dead said, "Well, you know so much about science fiction, you should have your own YouTube channel." So I started a YouTube channel called Mr. Sci-Fi. So now I've put the first hour of Space Command on Mr. Sci-Fi, where anyone can watch it. And we've got 95% thumbs up. We're almost 150,000 views, and we're heading toward 1 million. So
wow, you're incredible.
Yeah. So it's again. So I'm.
So what else is on your channel?
Well, I post about once a week about science fiction in general. So it could be.
But is it you talking?
Yeah.
Is it great.
I wanted to make it super simple because when I was a commentator on Morning Edition on National Public Radio, that was just me telling stories about my life. So, and I wanted it to be simple. And so
I didn't know about that, by the way.
Yeah,
I love NPR.
Yeah, it was great. It was fun while I was story editing shows, because I just spent a year writing a feature for New Line, and it was such a Megillah. And I wanted something simple where I could say, this is what happened to me, and this is what I think it meant. So that's how I ended up with the gig on Morning Edition.
It's sustainable too.
Right. And so with Mr. Sci-Fi, with my YouTube channel, I wanted it to be simple. So I just take my iPhone, I turn it on myself, I talk for however long I want to talk. It can be anywhere from 4 minutes to an hour, and then I just post it on my channel. And there's almost
it's so easy.
Right. Yes. And now I have like millions of views on my channel, and so I can use that also to raise money for Space Command, because I raised money on Kickstarter, but also I sold investment shares, a percentage of my producer's net profits on the first 4 episodes, and I made a small amount of money, $7,500. So some of my investors are truck drivers or martial arts teachers or people, and some are software developers. I mean, it's anywhere, people all around the world, and.
Is that neat for you? I mean, do you
cool.
ever take a moment to really get the scale of that? It's such an interesting
it's great.
thing. You've got a micro studio.
Well, yeah. So
with a global reach.
Well, I'll tell you a great story. A few weeks ago, I was in London pitching Space Command to Netflix, and I come out of the underground, out of the subway, and a voice on the sidewalk says behind me, "Mark Zickery, Space Command." And I turn, and it's a guy who's seen me on my YouTube channel and is a Space Command fan. And he works for the BBC, and he recognized me in London, on the street.
That's so neat.
Yeah, and so it's like, it's permeable now. Back when I started, you'd write a show, and the audience would see it, and maybe they'd write you a letter, or maybe you'd see some fans at a convention, and that was it. Now, I'm in communication with my fans every day. And there's a great story. I'll tell you. There was... because it takes longer when you're financing it this way. It's because Space Command, the first 2 hours has 1,900 visual effects shots, and so the first hour that we've put out has over 900. So it's a lot of heavy lifting.
Wow.
And but fortunately, I love visual effects. But the characters are central. The characters and the relationships and who they care about, and the fact that compassion is the driving force. That's what the show's about. But at one point,
that strikes me. That seems to be your core.
But at one point, someone was emailing saying, "Well, why is this taking so long?" Yeah. And someone answered them. One of the fans answered, and he sent me a message. He said, "Mark, we know you're doing a great job. Take the time you need to make it right, to do it right." And he said, and I don't say this lightly because I've just entered hospice. So I emailed him back and I said, does this mean what I think it means? And he said, yes, I've got terminal cancer, and he was in his 40s, and he had a kid, a daughter, and a wife. And I said, listen, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you the rough cuts of the 2 hours we shot and the 40 minutes of the second one. And I'm going to send you those scripts so you can watch this with your family and you can enjoy it, because there was no telling if he would be around when we were done. And he said, so I did that, and he said, thanks so much. And he's still with us. He's still fighting. He's still in there. And it's just, but it was so meaningful to me. And to be able to make it a two-way street where I could share this with him, because I didn't let any of the public see any of our rough cuts or any of that stuff, because it's a green screen and all this, nothing was done. But I thought, let's share that. And
someone at least have the story.
Yes. Well, it's that thing about congruity that we were talking earlier. In my life, I'm compassionate. In my work, I'm compassionate. That's what I'm writing about, people who are compassionate. Because in these times, I don't want to get into politics, but certainly in these times, I try to be kinder than I normally would be. Mm-hmm. If someone's trying to get in a parking space and there's a garbage can blocking them, I'll run across the street and move the garbage can. I'll open doors for people. I'll, just say hello, whatever.
One man can make a difference.
Well,
I agree
there's
with
a ripple effect. Kindness has a ripple effect, just like cruelty does. Yeah. And, my grandfather came here, and my mom was born here, and if he had stayed in his village, everyone else in his village in Poland was exterminated, including everyone else in his family. So my mother would have been exterminated, my grandfather would have been exterminated, my aunt, my grandmother, everyone would have, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So that's very real to me. And that was politics. That was letting someone get in power who used it for evil. Yeah. And I think we have to take a stand, and we have to reach out to others who are not like us. And if someone's different from you, smile at them, be friendly, invite them to dinner, whatever it is. We cannot live in our own little frightened worlds. It's too costly.
Simply keeping your eyes up and smiling at a stranger is, quite frankly, one of the simple gifts in this world for me.
Yeah.
When they smile back, especially.
Well, be human.
Yeah.
I mean, and be kind. And, but it's a verb. Compassion is a verb. You have to put it into action. It's not something you can just feel inside and say, "Oh, I'm a nice person because I'm nice." No, what are you doing?
Because I feel that someone else is hurting.
Yeah, what are you doing in the real world? It's that.
Gosh.
So yeah.
Well, we have something else in common in that we both work with our wives in every way possible.
Yes.
We spend every waking hour together.
That's
really.
Great. That's
great. We obviously have our own little places where we work, but we live and work together and play together.
That's great.
And I wouldn't change it. The things that we deal with and the things that we go through.
Yes.
I wouldn't change it. No. Tell us about you.
Well, I met Elaine when I was 20, and that was that. I got, I was the youngest of any of my friends to get married. So I got married when I was 21.
Wow.
And so my friends hadn't even gone through puberty. And, it was very interesting because I was nervous about this, of course, but because both my parents were married 4 times. And so I went to my dad for advice, and he said, well, you can always divorce her. Great. And
what advice did you expect?
But my mom had a friend who was a Catholic counselor, and he was a good one. He wasn't a pederast. And he was a really, really, really good-hearted guy. So I drove down to Manhattan Beach to get his advice. I was very worried that he would see into my secret soul and see my doubts and talk me out of getting married. So she sat me down.
20?
Yeah, I was like 21.
Okay.
And he sat me down and he said, "Do you love her?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Then marry her." And that was it. And so on those two pieces of advice, you can always divorce her, you love her, marry her. I got married. And Elaine was taking a big chance with me because I was just an art student. I just graduated college, and there was no telling if I would succeed in anything.
Well, that's everybody at that age. Unless she was 20 years older than you.
But she really backed me, and the Twilight Zone companion was rejected by 25 publishers before it sold. And over a 2-year period, and I would have hung it up, I would have given it up, and she said, "No, keep going." And we saw what was not working, which was it was the wrong agent, and we changed agents, and they went back to one of the publishers who'd rejected it to a different editor who could buy, and he bought it. And the book was an instant success. It's been in print ever since, and it's sold over 500,000 copies.
It's like Back to the Future. It's insane to me that anybody ever turned it down.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the product was when that was happening.
Yeah.
Well, the whole concept to me is just brilliant, especially for that show.
But this was like the late 70s, early 80s, and it would go to some old publisher, some old editor who would say, "Well, why would anyone buy a book about a TV show that's been off the network for 15 years?
Yeah. You're confused about your mediums."
But finally it went to a young editor who had the power to buy and who had grown up with Twilight Zone, and he said, "Yeah, of course." And his name was Erwin Applebaum. He became a very big force in publishing, and the book has been just, I just came out with a new edition, and just a few weeks ago.
Well,
and
so did the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
Should we talk about that? You probably don't have any involvement there.
I just did a review on Mr. Sci-Fi where I talked about it for an hour. And anyone who wants to subscribe to Mr. Sci-Fi can go on YouTube and Mr. Sci-Fi, Mark Zicree, there you go.
The only reason I haven't watched it yet is I'm dying to watch it with you, especially because of the subject matter, certainly for the first episode. It's about a comedian.
Yeah. So what do I think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, without giving any spoilers away, if possible.
Well, yeah.
I loved the original, as I told you, but I also really liked the 80s, the colorized 80s
I wrote for
ones.
that one.
You did?
For that one, yeah.
Oh man, I could pull out some of my favorites of them.
Well, there was amazing writing staff at Harlan Ellison, George R.R. Martin, etc.
You're kidding? The guy, the Game of Thrones guy?
Yeah, he was on the writing staff.
The Santa Claus guy we met at Comic-Con.
Yeah, I worked with George on 2 shows on that and on the Ron Perlman Beauty and the Beast, and I saw him recently.
The TV show with Linda. Wow.
Hamilton. Yes.
Linda Hamilton. Right?
Yeah. And so I saw George recently at the World Science Fiction Convention. He invited me to a party. We were hanging out. It was fun, and but I mean, we all know each other. I mean, it's fun because we've been crafting the history of television over the last several decades, but we all hang out. We all know each other. All the producers from Star Trek and Babylon 5 and the Orville and all these shows. We all know. Everyone in science fiction knows everybody else.
Wow. It's a small little group.
Yes,
I mean, not that it's a small group, but you don't you're not extroverts. You're not out at every party.
Well, we're all jazzed by the same thing, which is creating something wonderful. And the fact that it's like we share our work with millions of people around the world, and it lasts forever. Right. It'll outlast us. People will be watching Smurfs when I'm long gone.
Yeah.
And I once did a pilot for NBC in Thailand, and I went to my hotel room and turned on the TV. It was one of my Smurfs episodes in Thai. So it was like,
no way.
That was,
Wow.
And, that was cool. But I wrote, the script I wrote for Twilight Zone, a week before prep, the censors pulled the plug on it because it was too violent. Now it would be nothing. It was called Knife Through the Veil. And
so was your episode not produced?
Never produced.
No kidding.
And Doug Hayes, who was one of the great directors on the original Twilight Zone, he did Eye of the Beholder and the After Hours and the Howling Man. He was going to direct it. He was a dear friend. But eventually I'll shoot that. That's
what I'm seeing. You're a studio now. You can just do it.
Now that I'm greenlighting myself, I can do whatever the hell I want. And I'm beyond space.
He's a professional segue maker.
Yeah, so it's fine. And then, but you were asking about the new Twilight Zone. In short,
just curious.
I think Jordan Peele is astonishingly talented. I loved Get Out. Rod Serling would have loved it. I thought Us was very, very interesting. I liked it. It has some flaws, but it's still a great piece of work. The problem with the new Twilight Zone is he isn't the writer-director on the episodes that have been released so far.
Ooh.
And so they're not. I didn't think they were very strong. And I think, like with Rod Serling, Rod wrote 92 out of the 156 Twilight Zone episodes. So there was a huge...
And he polished all of them.
Right.
I mean, they were all had his feeling.
Right. It was his show, his viewpoint, his aesthetic, his work, his voice, everything.
Is this a network decision to air them out of order? Or?
No. And I don't know if he's writing and directing any of them.
Perhaps he's just brought it back.
We'll see. But what they should have done, of course, was the first few episodes should have been every bit as handmade by Jordan Peele as Us or as Get Out, because that's what people were expecting. Yeah.
I feel like between his successes lately and the franchise itself, the fact that it should be treated...
Yes. and it's not that they're deliberately trying to do a poor job. It's just that this is a very hard medium to pull off. This anthology, what Rod did, like when they brought Twilight Zone back in the 80s, so there were some great episodes, but it was much more hit and miss because you didn't have Rod at the top of it saying this is how it should be. And there's a great story about Rod.
They experimented more with weird in that one too. It was almost like half Tales from the Dark Side.
Yes. But also, when Rod sold Twilight Zone, he wrote 4 pilot scripts before he was able to sell the show. He was very determined, and then he knew he couldn't write all of them, but he was writing most of them. And so he initially opened it up to unsolicited submissions. He said everybody can send scripts in. They got 5,000 scripts. He and his staff read through 500 of them, and none of them were any good. And so he didn't know what to do. So he called Ray Bradbury, who was the top science fiction writer at the time. And he said, what do I do? And Ray said, come over to the house. And he took him down into the basement where his office was, and he pulled out 4 books from the bookshelf. One was by John Collier, who was a British fantasy writer. One was by Ray himself, and 2 were by his protégés, Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont. And he said, read these and then let's talk. And so Rod bought a story by John Collier that he made into a Twilight Zone episode. There was one episode written by Ray that was made by Twilight Zone, and Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont were hired as the major writers under Rod. And a third of Bradbury's protégés was George Clayton Johnson, who became the other of the great Twilight Zone writers. And so these were people...
Ray was integral in
he was.
putting that team together.
Well, the funny thing was...
I didn't know that.
Well, the funny thing about Ray was... I tried to interview him when I wrote the Twilight Zone Companion. He turned me down, and I'd heard that he and Rod, their friendship had fallen apart over something. And when I was up in Rod Serling's attic, when I was researching the Twilight Zone Companion when I was in my 20s, I found this box in his attic, and it was unmarked. And I opened it, and there were Twilight Zone scripts that were bought but not made. Whoa. And there were 2 by Ray Bradbury, and one had a handwritten note on the top saying, "Dear Rod, here's the first of what will be many scripts for the Twilight Zone, looking forward to the future," basically. And yet Bradbury only had 1 produced script, and it wasn't either of those 2. So clearly something had gone very awry. But Bradbury wouldn't talk about it. Rod never talked about it publicly. So it was a mystery. So and so the Twilight Zone Companion came out, and I just alluded to this, but I couldn't really answer it. And I'd always wanted Ray Bradbury to be one of my mentors, but you grow up, and I'd run into him a few times at conventions, but the lightning didn't strike, and so ultimately I'd sort of say, well, he's never going to be my friend or my mentor. And then one day, about 15 years ago, I had done this little DVD of Moby Dick, where I'd taken different performances by different people of Moby Dick and amalgamated them into the ultimate Moby Dick. So it was Charles Laughton as Ahab, and Richard Basehart as Ishmael from the version that Ray wrote for John Huston in the 50s, and Gregory Peck as Father Mapple from the miniseries. And I just put it together it was a 70-minute dramatic play. And I gave it to my friends as a Christmas present one year. I would never have given it to Ray Bradbury because he wrote the John Huston version, and I was screwing with his work. So one day I come home, and on my answering machine there's a message, and the message is, "Mr. Zicree, this is Ray Bradbury. I've just listened to your Moby Dick. Please call me." And I think, fuck, I've pissed off Ray Bradbury.
That's what I think.
So I call him, and my heart is in my throat, and he said, "I loved it." He said, "Charles Laughton was one of my dear friends. You must come to the house." So I went to the house. I went to his house in Cheviot Hills, and I went into his room where he had all this stuff from his career. And we just hit it off. And then for the next over 10 years, once a month I would go to Ray's house, and we would just sit and talk about life and writing and art. And we had this amazing relationship. And he was a dear friend and mentor. And so I'm writing a book about him called My Ray Bradbury, about all these things he told. And he told, so finally, at first I didn't tell him I'd written the Twilight Zone Companion because I knew he and Rod had a falling out. And so finally, after we became really good friends, I fessed up that I'd written this book, and I said, "Okay, Ray, tell me what happened between you and Rod." And he told me. And so on Mr. Sci-Fi, I shot a video of myself, and I said, "Okay, here's the story Ray told me, and it's going to take a while, so get a cup of coffee," and it takes about a half hour to tell the story. And it's about how they fell apart and how their friendship fell apart, and it's an amazing story. And
wow.
So I got that.
I can't wait to watch that.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
But it was so amazing that I got to both be the voice of the Twilight Zone, the world's expert on the Twilight Zone, and also got to be such friends with Ray Bradbury because it was a dream come true.
You're so. I mean, this.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but if this were all after you died, the story is already so complete. You know what I mean? And you're still doing so much.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was at Ray's house one time, I look over and there's an Oscar. And I remembered that Ray had won an Emmy for The Halloween Tree, which was made as an animated Chuck Jones TV special adaptation of his book, The Halloween Tree, but I couldn't remember him winning an Oscar. So I said, "Ray, what's the story with the Oscar?" He said, a friend gave it to me. And so I said, "Can I take a photo with that?" He said, "Sure." So I took a photo with the Oscar. Ray took the photo of me. So it was like...
Well, whose was it? Was it John Huston's or something?
No, there was an art director who was a neighbor of Ray's, and he knew that Ray wanted to have the Oscar. So when he died, he left it to Ray.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
I mean,
isn't that great?
Again,
yeah.
After he died, yeah.
It's great. But Ray kept everything. I mean, when he moved with his family to L.A. when he was 13 years old, he said, tell me where a studio is. And they said, well, MGM is in Culver City. He said, that's too far. What's the nearest one? And Paramount was the nearest one. Mm-hmm. So he was 13 years old. He put on his roller skates. He roller skated to Paramount. And just as he got there, W.C. Fields was coming out. This is 1933.
Oh, so this is the old gauge.
Right.
Paramount was a tiny little thing.
Right. So he goes up to, he roller skates up to W.C. Fields, and he says, "Can I have your autograph?" So W.C. Fields writes him an autograph and hands it to him and says, "There you are, you son of a bitch."
Go away, can't you bother me?
Exactly. And so, but Ray, one time when I visited Ray, he showed me this little wooden box. He handed to me this little wooden box, and inside were all the autographs from when he was a kid. So it was it was Marlene Dietrich and George Burns and on
everybody
and on.
who was on the lot at the time, I bet.
And he told me this amazing story when he wrote Moby Dick, and the premiere was held in L.A., and he was going up to with John Huston, his wife, and his wife. They were walking up the steps to the theater for the red carpet premiere, and he looked over, and there was the velvet rope, and behind it were all the autograph hunters, and he noticed this woman and her son, who he had been an autograph hunter with when he was a kid, going to premieres when he was like a teenager.
When he was on the other side of the room.
And he walked up to them, and he said, "How are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, we're great." And they said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I wrote that movie." And suddenly he was surrounded by autograph hunters signing autographs for them, and he said it was one of the greatest moments of his life.
That's
amazing.
That's the full circle
Amazing.
thing.
It was.
Oh.
So again, I'm so blessed to be doing what I love, to have my heroes become friends and collaborators. It's just amazing.
You're a treasure. I hope you know that.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to get
it.
to know you through
Well,
this.
thanks.
Same.
Thank you. Of course.
I mean, just
and of course, you guys are welcome.
fellow human.
Well, you're welcome to my roundtable anytime you want to come. It's every Thursday night.
Would very much like that.
It's way
Can't
fun. It's way fun. But again, it's like, at the end of your life, you look back and you say, what have I done that's been worth doing? What have I done that's made the world better? And that's the question. Have I made the world better? And then...
What's your answer?
Well, my answer is I have. And both in my work, whether it's Real Ghostbusters or Smurfs or Star Trek The Next Generation or, Deep Space Nine or, Space Command.
Forgive me, you worked on Next Gen too?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a favorite of most of my friends. I
Yes.
think generationally
Oh, yeah.
speaking, that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
just the one we had.
And Deep Space Nine was terrific to work on. That happened. It was very funny because I pitched the story. It was called Far Beyond the Stars, and one of the characters goes back to the 50s, and he's a science fiction writer, and it's one of the more acclaimed episodes, and it took a year for it to sell. I pitched it and took a year for it to sell. So Hans Beimler, who was one of the executive producers on DS9, called me at my office in Paramount when I was working on Sliders and said, "I have great news. We're buying Far Beyond the Stars." I said, "Great timing, Hans." Because I was writing 2 episodes of Sliders back to back, and the only time I could even meet with their writing staff was at lunch. So I drove over the hill to Nicodell's, which was next to Paramount. It was a restaurant. Met with the entire writing staff: Brian Fuller, Ron Moore, everybody. They're all now showrunners. Ira Bear and we batted out the story, worked out the story there at lunch, and then I wrote the outline that weekend. And so 2 different studios were shooting my work the same week. So it was Sliders was shooting one of my episodes at Universal, and they were shooting my Deep Space Nine episode at Paramount the same week. So I got a photo of myself the same...
You just spent the whole time on Going Past, didn't you?
Well, I got a photo of myself the same day with both casts with me in the same clothes.
Oh.
So that was a Hollywood...
That's
that was
so
a dream
cool.
come true. Dream come true. And now I'm working with a lot of the same actors again, So but I don't have to wait for the studios or the networks to make anything happen. And I'm writing the book Greenlighting Yourself to let people know how they can do all this stuff too. It's like a cake recipe.
You said that earlier, Greenlighting Yourself.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a great segue.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that a little
sure.
bit? Because we
Yeah.
touched on it a little bit before the show, and
Yep.
it's something that Mrs.
Yeah.
Ryan and I didn't used to really understand, and
Yeah.
we've since done it.
Of course. Well, again, before the internet, before crowdfunding, any of that stuff, it was impossible. If you wanted to reach an audience of millions of people, you had to have a studio and a network or a major publisher if you wanted to do books. None of that is true anymore at all. And so many people make such a mistake writing a script and waiting somehow to get an agent, somehow to get a studio or network to buy it, and they spend their lives in longing, and their hearts are broken. And they go back to, wherever they're from, the Botswana, and they think, I guess I didn't have what it took. And they might have been wonderful. They might have had incredible talent, but they were sort of barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah.
And
or waiting for it to happen.
Right. And so what you have to do is you have to say, well, if it were all up to me to make it happen. See, another thing science fiction never predicted was that we would all have video cameras in our pockets, and so...
Film cameras, really. I
Right.
mean, feature film.
And so, really, if someone says, I want to be a director, well, what's your excuse not to do that now?
There's no barrier now.
Right. I mean, I often say anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Because if you at least do it and you're lousy, you can get better, but you're at least doing it, and then you learn from your mistakes. Whereas if you're just kind of longing and waiting and hoping that Quentin Tarantino will recognize your genius, well, good luck, good luck.
No, you're right. It's even Wayne Gretzky going to your hockey thing, isn't it? Like 100% of the shots you don't take, you don't need to miss or something.
Right, exactly.
Of course, it makes perfect sense.
Exactly. So Greenlighting Yourself, I sold the book. I taught a class called Greenlighting Yourself, and then I went on Amazon to see if anyone had written a book with that name, and I was stunned that no one had. So I emailed 2 friends of mine who were book editors at 2 different publishers, and I said, would you like a book called Greenlighting Yourself? And one of them, Silman James, emailed me back, said yes. And so I met with my editor and just told him what I had in mind, and Elaine and I are writing the book now. It comes out this year. And so
part of it obviously is the technical, the physical, literally today we have the technology and the ability to do these things. But is part of it more about overcoming the obstacles that one puts in front of, and it's not so much about the camera and the crew and everything else versus, I don't know if I can do it.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's the thing of, don't stop yourself. I mean, if you have a dream, I saw a great quote from Tony Robbins the other day. It was like, if you have a dream, if you dream something, it's a fantasy. If you talk about it, it's a goal. If you set a date, it's a reality.
Interesting.
And that's true. And so, I'm rolling camera on the rest of the second 2-hour Space Command episode July 1st. And so that means I have to raise money, and I have to make it happen. I have to.
You don't seem worried about it. You know it'll happen.
No, I have to build an alien hibernation ship. We have to build 3 creature suits. Rock and roll. Great. But we already shot 40 minutes of that episode, because after we shot the 2-hour pilot of Space Command, and again, you can watch the full hour on my YouTube channel, Mr. Sci-Fi. When I shot the 2-hour pilot, I was going to close the studio down and put everything in storage because I had to shift the money to post.
Oh, you have a physical space, of course.
Yeah, I had my own studio for a couple of years, physical studio, and I own a red camera and sound equipment and a jib and all that stuff. But I was putting it in storage. But when I looked at the sets and the costumes and the props I had, I realized that I could shoot 40. I wrote the first 8 hours of the 12-hour season before I shot any of it, and because I'm a TV guy.
Right.
And but I realized that I could shoot 40 minutes of the second 2-hour script for very little money because I had the props and the sets and the costumes. So I reached out to my investors. Within a week, they'd sent me $40,000, and that was enough to roll camera. So we shot 40 minutes and it had James Hong from Blade Runner and Big Trouble in Little China. He's the one in Blade Runner who says, "I just make eyes, I make eyes."
Oh, yeah, of course.
And he was the villain.
That's so funny,
And he's the villain in Big Trouble in Little China. And so I wrote a role for him and for Ron Tahir, he's in the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies, this Federation captain who gets skewered by the Romulans at the beginning. And he's in Iron Man. He's in a ton of stuff. And, I just cast people I love. And they all say yes, and it's hugely fun. And so we're going to shoot the rest of that 2-hour story in July, and then probably in the fall we'll shoot the next 2-hour story.
You just jumped around to something else. It's almost like you can see my card. I'm telling you, you have X-ray vision. You brought up the J.J. Abrams Star Trek franchise, or whatever you would call that saga.
Yeah.
I mentioned I was working at Paramount and Everybody Hates Chris. That happened to be at the same time that they shot the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, the first one.
Yes.
I also used to work previously for J.J. Abrams on a different show when it was on Felicity.
Oh, that's fun.
Felicity back
That's when I met him. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, so that was my history with J.J. Abrams. It was 1 year way back, probably 10 years earlier.
Yes.
His assistant at the time happened to still be the same, he was a writer's assistant or something on Felicity. So we knew each other. One thing led to another. Yeah. And I was able to go see the set. And if you remember at the time,
I was on that set. It was
locked
amazing.
down. It was so locked down. They built it above.
It looked like an Apple store. Yeah.
Yeah, and the dome slid on and off of the set.
It was cool.
It was on a whole big thing so that because they could light in or bring the dome.
And it had these monitors that wrapped all the way around as the ship's monitors on the bridge set. It was a gorgeous set.
Everything worked. Everything was real.
It was
so
a gorgeous
everything
set.
was like
so
live.
neat.
It was super cool. Yeah, I was there.
But
it's like
nobody.
Futuristic.
Yeah, and it was like a thing. It was like, all right, well, we can walk through there, but you need to shut the fuck up and don't fucking look at it.
Right.
I mean, like, don't touch anything.
That's great.
But we can go in.
Yeah, that's swell.
And that was one of the things that at the time was like, I don't know what the heck it was, but the fact that I knew a couple people that could get me in there, all of a sudden my stock on the lockout, it was like, oh, wait a second, you can go into stage whatever they were shooting it on.
Well, I'll tell you how I met JJ. The Museum of Radio and Television at the Paley Center in Beverly Hills.
I still say MTR too.
Yeah, they did a night devoted to Twilight Zone, the original Twilight Zone, and so they had 15 people who'd worked on the shows, actors, writers, directors, producers, and me. And so I was up on the stage, and it was very funny because anytime they asked a question, it had been so long ago that the guests wouldn't remember, but I would. So by the end of the and actually, there was one question where I knew the answer and I didn't say because it was embarrassing because it was like because I sat on the far side and all the heads were turned toward me of the panelists to answer the question, and it was about 3,000 people in the audience, something like that. And at the end of the evening, a guy came up from the audience and he said, "Hi, Mr. Zicree, I'm a big fan of your work. I'd love to take you to lunch. My name's J.J. Abrams." And so this is when
that sounds like the guy from Felicity. He was just kind of eager. He was still eager.
Yeah.
By the way, we should say this too. He was incredibly accomplished by the time he had done Felicity. We make it sound like Felicity was at the beginning of his career. He'd already written Forever Young. He'd already written
Regarding Henry.
Regarding Henry. He'd done a polish on Armageddon. I mean, he has been working already.
Anything to do with Armageddon? I didn't know.
Yeah,
that.
He wrote a rewrite of it for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, no idea.
Yeah.
So he'd been around when Felicity.
Right.
This was pre-Alias, but he'd already been around.
Right. So I had lunch with JJ and we hit it off. We became friends, and then a very interesting thing happened. I was on a panel, because I'd written for Star Trek Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. I was on a panel at a science fiction convention, and this is just when Enterprise was on the air, and the fans really didn't like it much, and it was kind of winding down.
Scott Bakula, right?
Yeah, after 4 seasons, it was winding down. And I was on a panel with all these different people from all the different iterations of Star Trek, including Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov on the original show. And someone from the audience asked, what's the future of Star Trek? And Walter told a story that was so peculiar that I sat down with him afterwards and I said, tell me all about this.
Yeah.
And what he told me was that there were a group of fans in upstate New York who had gotten the blueprints of the original Star Trek sets and had built...
This is true.
Yes, this is true. They had built replicas of all the original Star Trek sets, and they were shooting their own Star Trek episodes, putting them online, and getting more viewers than Enterprise was getting on UPN.
Yeah.
So I went there, and Walter was about to fly up to upstate New York and do an episode written by D.C. Fontana, who had story edited the original Star Trek and written episodes, and he was going to play Chekhov in this fan film, right? So I went that night, and I watched some of the episodes they'd done, and some of the fan actors weren't at a professional level, but the visual effects were great, the sets were great, the costumes were great.
Yeah, the lighting and everything.
Right.
Technically, it was great.
And the spirit was there, the passion and the love of it. And so years ago, when Star Trek was going to come back in the 70s as a TV show, a friend of mine, Michael Reeves, who actually brought me into television in the first place, had pitched a story, the Great Sulu story, to Paramount. And I'd always wanted to work with George Takei, and it was a great story. But because Star Wars came out and they made Star Trek movies, they pulled the plug on that show, and it never got made. So I remember that story, and I called Michael, because we're very good friends, and I said, would you like to do this? Would you like to write this with me if we can get these fans up in upstate New York to say yes? And I'd also been looking for something to direct as sort of my sample. And so I called the boys in upstate New York and I said, hey, Michael Reeves and I both wrote for Star Trek The Next Generation. Michael's an Emmy winner. We'd like to do this Sulu episode. So, and I want to direct it. And they said, okay. But they'd been shooting mini DV, and I said, well, we have to shoot HD. They said, if you can get the cameras, okay.
Right.
So then I went to George Takei's house, and I sat down with George. I typed up the outline in 3 pages, and it was different from what Michael had pitched because Star Trek The Next Generation had done some similar things. So I revised it so it was all on the ship and all with Sulu. Sulu gets marooned for 30 years. He has a daughter. Ooh. She's never been anywhere and doesn't know anybody. And they're brought to the ship. And it's all in the wink of an eye on the Enterprise. And so I sat down with George and I said, you're a wonderful actor. I've seen you in things beyond Star Trek. You're brilliant, but you never got the great Sulu episode. And I need you to read this 3 pages and tell me if you'll do it. And he read it and he said, I'm in. And so I then spent 6 months building a production team with my keys, the heads of my departments from L.A. I cast Christina Moses as his daughter. She's now starring in A Million Little Things on ABC. This was the beginning of her career. She'd never done TV.
Wow.
She'd only done New York stage. And so we built our team for 6 months. We wrote the script. And then Elaine and I flew to upstate New York. We had actors camp where we did improv and scene study with the fan actors that I had to utilize to see who had chops, who was good. And then I wrote the script gearing it toward who was strong as an actor. And so George Takei and Elaine and I went up to upstate New York. We shot for 9 days on the Enterprise sets.
But how was that for you to see the sets and everything from when you were a kid?
Just great.
Because you saw them, you were at the last episode when he was a kid.
Phenomenal.
You know what I mean? It's really cool.
But I said to Michael, we're not going to step back from this. We're going to write this exactly as if it were a network show. And it had 700 visual effects shots, which even a network show would never have.
Not from those days.
And it was a solid year of post. We shot 2 days here in L.A. where we built Sulu's ship. There was a wraparound on his ship years later. And then a day in Orlando with the effects team. And it took a year of post. But before I shot it was when JJ announced he was going to do the Star Trek movie. So I had lunch with JJ. I said to JJ, would you like to meet Rod Serling's widow, Carol? He said, sure. So we had lunch, the 3 of us at Disney. And I said, JJ, I'm going to be shooting this thing with George Takei. Do you mind? Is that okay with you? Is that cool with you? He said, fine. Because I didn't want business affairs to hear about this, go to J.J. Abrams, and he would pull the plug not knowing it was me. And I didn't want to put a year and a half of my life into something that would never see the light of day.
You also didn't even know if he was going to use George or what, right?
So he said, it's fine. So then I knew I was okay. And it's funny because there were 2 people who were table hopping at the end of our lunch. One was the head of the studio, Bob Iger, and the other was Steven Spielberg. And so Spielberg comes up. It's great. And this was the executive dining suite where, like, anyone else who tries to get in there is like tased
in the R&D building or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Spielberg comes over, and JJ introduces me as the author of the Twilight Zone Companion. And Spielberg says, "I live by that book."
Come on.
Yes. But it was funny because I had a camera with me, but I was too shy to get a photo with Spielberg. So So the funny thing was, so on my Facebook page, there's a picture of me with Guillermo del Toro, because I wrote a book with Guillermo recently, and a photo with JJ, and a photo with George Lucas, who I ran into at a Hamburger Hamlet, oddly enough.
Oh, my gosh.
But I didn't have the photo with Spielberg, so I went to Madame Tussauds here in L.A., and I got a photo of myself with the wax figure of Spielberg. So if you look at these photos of me with all these A-list directors, Spielberg's a little bit waxy. So
Oh, that's amazing. I could go on and on. We've already gone an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I don't want to take any more of your time, but I'm hoping that we get a chance to have
Yeah.
a conversation again in the future,
course.
and we would very much like to come to your Thursday roundtable.
Of course. And by the way, if anyone wants to watch that Sulu episode, it got nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula, which are the 2 top awards in science fiction, and it's on Mr. Sci-Fi. You can actually watch that in its entirety.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
We used to know the Mythbusters pretty
Yeah,
well,
sure,
and Grant Imahara was a big fan, and he ended up doing an episode, I believe,
Wow.
on that same
right.
set
Yes.
or somewhere.
Yes.
I don't know, probably not
right.
yours,
But it's cool.
Something.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And when he was, very excited about flying out to do it and the whole thing,
Yeah.
but he sent the pictures, and then you look
Wow,
at it, and
it's
you're
amazing.
like,
Well, now it's a museum, because Paramount ultimately did pull the plug on the Star Trek fan films, and so
Oh.
they've now turned it into a museum where you can go up to upstate New York, and they turn on all the lights and all
Great.
the sounds, and
because that's what it would
yeah.
be to go there and
Yeah,
to be in the
amazing.
Enterprise.
But now they have a thing where you can actually go there and make a little fan film that you can just have for yourself, and
Just
you
not
know,
to make
yeah,
money off it.
yeah, exactly.
That's kinda
And-
cool.
But it's very fun. But again, it all comes from the love of it. And again, the fans and the pros, it's all merged now. There's no those lines of demarcation don't exist anymore. It's who has the willingness to pick up camera, to learn how to run camera, do sound, maybe learn VFX, editing. I mean, these
if
things
you're
are
brave
all,
enough, you can greenlight yourself.
well, if you own a phone and a laptop and you're on the internet, you have your own studio, basically.
Yeah.
We all
Yeah.
know that now.
You can do it.
Yeah.
All right, we do a little thing here where I just record you for social media, where you tell us where we can find you. It sounds like the YouTube channel and whatever, but
Yes.
if there's anything else, by all means.
You can find me on Mr. Sci-Fi on YouTube, and I'm also
Great.
on Facebook and Twitter, and I wander around the streets of Los Angeles.
It's all blurry. I'll figure out how to do this. I don't know. But did you say? Do you have a Instagram or anything?
Not with,
Or
we're setting one up, but mainly
There's
I'm
no
on,
wrong answer.
I'm on Facebook as Mark Zickery. I'm on Twitter as @MarkZickery, and Mr. Sci-Fi is on YouTube, and I post every few days.
Every few days, Mr. Sci-Fi
Yeah.
on YouTube.
It's fun. It's really fun, and I'm very grateful to everyone who gives me a word of kindness or lobs a few dollars my way or any of it. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
I'm gonna go watch your stuff.
It's
I'm
cool.
so fascinated because
Yeah.
I
You've got
write
2
now.
new subscribers.
Yeah.
We switched. He was telling you a little bit, but like
Yeah.
I write now, so
Yeah.
it's like it's fascinating to hear real writers talk.
Yeah.
It's why I love real comedy.
Yes.
And everyone thinks they're funny, and I
Yes.
totally understand. And
Right.
everyone thinks they're a writer, and I
Right.
totally understand because I
Yeah.
have a journal.
Sure.
Fine.
Right.
But like I love hearing the brains of real wordsmiths and
Yes.
mathematicians.
Yeah,
and
I know.
words.
For me, it's the
It's fun.
open-mindedness. That's what
Yes.
comes across from you.
It's
That you're
fun.
never going to put that barrier up.
No.
Everything is possible.
No.
Everything is open.
Well,
Everything is almost a
yeah.
whimsical
I
place
know.
to live. And
Well, they
stay.
did a documentary on my roundtable where they followed us for a year, and back in 2009, and one of our members who's central in the documentary was he was a writer, director, actor, producer. He'd been one of the leads on Highway to Heaven, and he was a quadriplegic.
Oh my goodness!
And we helped him make a pilot with Bryan Cranston.
I loved Highway to Heaven. By the way.
Yeah. But I mean, he's
There you
so
go.
amazing things happen.
Look at you.
Yeah, it's fun.
You're such a warm person. You
thanks.
must know
Yeah.
all of that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just that I just met you today.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm good.
Well, no,
Thanks.
my wife keeps my feet on the ground. You know, it's like
That's so wonderful.
Yeah,
I hope
she-
we get to meet your
Oh,
wife.
you will.
Yeah.
She runs the table with me. She's there when I'm there.
Elaine's
So,
there?
Yeah,
Her
she's
na- is
great.
her name?
She's
Oh,
great. She's
can't
much
wait.
better than I am in every way. So
You're a delight. Thank you
yeah.
so
Well,
much for coming and
Well,
talking
thanks,
to us
guys.
today.
Thank you
I've
so
really
Means the
much.
enjoyed
world.
it. This has been swell.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks.
well,
Stay
great.
there. Stay there. It's all right.
Stay there. Okay. You bet.
Mrs. Ryan, I love you very much.
Love you too.
Mark, we love you very much. Thank
Love
you very
you
much
so
for being
much.
here.
Thanks, guys. I've loved it.
We love everybody at home. Please love one another, and we will see you tomorrow.
Rock and roll. That's great. Yep. Okay. Good.
Oh my gosh.
It's every Thursday, 6:30. You guys are more than welcome.